I'm your host, Tim Wood. Welcome to The Natural You, where we explore how to better connect with nature, both in us and around us. Today's guest is Dr. Max Jacobs. Max is a 2006 graduate of New York Chiropractic College and practices just south of Lisbon, Portugal. Listen up to hear how his early years were influenced by the academic and contemplative environment of his father's psychology department, then how by chance he connected deeply to the Buddhist tradition while studying Qigong. He has studied under several masters of all lineages of Tibetan Buddhism and is currently a student of Tibetan medicine at the Sowa Rigpa Institute. Find out about his struggle with cashew nuts, why death isn't morbid, and get tips on a powerful meditation technique called Tonglen. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2, season 2. We've got my friend Max Jacobs, who is an American living in Portugal, being interviewed by a South African living in the UK. So it's truly international affair. Max is going to chat to us today about Buddhism and nature, and I'm hoping to get some insights into that for myself because I find it a fascinating area, and hopefully you'll pick up some tips too. Max, welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Happy to be joining you.
Awesome. Could you let us know how you, as effectively from a Jewish lineage, got involved or got interested in Buddhism?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's kind of a long story, but to start with, both my parents were Jewish, and but I should say not super into it. And we grew up sort of celebrating Hanukkah, but that was about the extent of it. I think I recall there being a week where our cereal was removed from the house when I was a kid, so that was kind of annoying. But no, my father was a liberal Jewish college professor, a psychology professor, and quite atheistic, I would say, actually. So he used to, in fact, he used to tease quite a lot about there not being a God, and sort of try to tempt God to come and get him,
to smite him down.
Yeah, absolutely, to smite him down, and of course that never seemed to happen. So yeah, he was quite atheistic, and I sort of grew up in his psychology department. This was at the University of Maine. And so a lot of my earliest childhood memories are of sitting in his office and looking at the books on his shelf, and playing with Matchbox cars on the floor, and talking with the other psychology professors, and so that was kind of my childhood, and it was very formative because there were books that I would take down, and some I'll never forget. There was a book by a Chinese guy, Lin Yutang, called The Importance of Living. And this had a big impact on me. I remember being 9, 10, 11 years old and reading this book.
Wow.
And his philosophy was sort of very pagan and Taoist, and that really appealed to me. And he was very critical of Buddhism in that book, not a fan, you might say. He basically, his take was that it's kind of all about suffering, and it's sort of miserable, and there's no joy in there, and so
that Buddhism was about suffering.
Yeah, that Buddhism was all about that, and so I kind of left it at that. I didn't really have any interest in Buddhism growing up. I was very interested in Eastern philosophies in general, and Taoism in particular, but not Buddhism because of what I had learned from him, because of what I had read, and so it was completely accidental that I got into Buddhism. This was after I had graduated from chiropractic college. For many years, I had read texts and translated books on Taoism and on the internal arts, and Qigong and Neigong, and I was really, really interested in those things. And I had also done a course in Chinese medicine and acupuncture. So So part of my head was always in that world. And when I found online a favorite author of mine was teaching qigong at a center a few states away in Vermont. I was in Maine, and she was coming to Vermont to teach, and so I just jumped at this opportunity to see kind of a hero of mine and get to learn from her, and it was a long qigong course, and it was great. It was wonderful. But what really impressed me was the place where this was happening. I had no idea whatsoever. It was a Buddhist center called Karme Choling in Barnett, Vermont, and it was started by a Tibetan Buddhist who came to the States in the 70s. Very controversial sort of figure, but an incredible teacher. And and what struck me was this place and the people seemed to have something about them that was just something I wanted, just something attractive. There was a real mindfulness and peace amongst the people there, and uh, it was very, very attractive. So, although I went there for one thing, I wound up getting immediately very interested in whatever was happening there, which was Buddhism. So I got interested in that, and I just dove in and wanted to kind of devour the topic. But unfortunately, fortunately, it's sort of got endless depth, So, um,
So, so just to kind of interrupt, you said like a controversial figure, and I understand there are different schools in Buddhism.
right.
Um, was he from a particular school, or how does that pertain to where you are now?
Yeah, he was so he was his lineage was Karma Kagyu. So there's four main lineages today of Tibetan Buddhism. Kagyu is one of the main ones, of course, uh, and so he escaped Tibet. This was after the Chinese invasion, but he had to leave with some followers and with another monk and cross much of the Himalayas and get to India. And so he managed to do that, and then ultimately went to Oxford in the UK, and then to America. So this Tibetan teacher, his name was Chogyam Trungpa, and yeah, very controversial because um, he it seems he felt that in order to teach Buddhism in the West, he needed to kind of reinvent it in a sense, not change the fundamental principles. I think those never really change. But when Buddhism is transferred from one place to another, like it was from India to Tibet, it's going into a new culture, and so it needs to kind of blend in with that. And
So culturally appropriate.
yeah, absolutely. And so he saw that was going to be an enormous challenge because these Westerners were like hippies at the time, and smoking weed and doing drugs, and he wanted to make this work, but obviously he needed to do something quite different. So he disrobed to start with.
Mm.
He actually married a girl from the UK, and then they went to the US, and all of that's very controversial from a traditional Tibetan point of view. Um, and changing the way that you teach these things, which have been passed down in an unbroken lineage for many centuries, that's very controversial as well.
Mm.
So really, everything he did was controversial, and he had, as well, unusual relationships with many of his students, and um, so that's a long story, lots of drama on that side of things. But the important part to me is first that he did so much to bring Buddha Dharma to the West. That was incredibly important, and a great many of his teachings are really, really wonderful, really inspiring, incredibly insightful, um, and beyond that, well.
he packaged it in a way that the Westerners could understand. Um,
Yeah, he really repackaged it. But I don't know if that has anything to do with how I felt when I visited his center, honestly, except that I think you can see his efforts in his students, which is really something you should look for, right? When you're trying to evaluate a spiritual tradition, you can't always go back, 600 years and look at it from above, right? You can't, but you can look at
the proof's
uh,
in the pudding.
the proof's in the pudding, and so the proof is in those disciples and those Western students
Mm.
of his, and so I found them to be really interesting and really special. And ultimately, I went back to that center for other uh, lessons in what they called Shambhala Buddhism, and also just regular sort of Buddhist classes on the basics, so to speak. Um, and again, I was struck by some of these teachers. One in particular, a really old student of Chogyam Trungpa, who's now teaches quite a lot internationally. Um, being being around him was the first time I really felt like I was around somebody with an energy that was lovely, but I didn't quite understand or know how to relate to. It just immediately struck me. I sort of felt like I was feeling it was like the energy of a tree. I mean, he had this sort of um, very sort of peaceful and majestic energy that's just really lovely to be around. And um, so that was my first experience with that, and then shortly thereafter, I found a Tibetan teacher who came to Maine once or twice a year to teach, and that particular teacher, who's in a different lineage, in the Gelugpa lineage, the lineage of the Dalai Lama. Um, he was the one who I took Buddhist vows with initially.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was around 2008,
Okay.
2009.
Wow. Wow. So you took it quite seriously, and you took the vows, and you've been essentially a practicing Buddhist, and since then,
Well, an
aspiring.
aspiring one. So I really have to preface all of this by saying, yeah, I think of myself that way. I mean, I guess there's a lot to it, and yeah, my aspiration is to be a practicing
I like
Buddhist.
that. You're always on it, right?
uh,
You're always trying to learn a bit more and get a bit deeper.
yeah, and also just trying to kind of integrate the most basic things into daily life, the most basic. And it's yeah, it's a wonderful challenge.
Could you give us okay? Let's give us three of those basic tenets
Mm.
that you would seek to incorporate.
Well, so there's first of all, in Buddhism there's these long lists for everything, right? So it's quite hard to to give you just three.
So I'm giving you a
um,
tough question there.
yeah, I mean, in terms of things that I want to try to integrate into daily life, I mean, um, one is just maintaining a certain mindfulness and presence.
Mm.
Um, which is to say, for me, because my brain is sort of like jello at this point. I sort of I'm very distractible, extremely distractible. So I'm more aware of that, I think, than I used to be. But maintaining awareness during everyday life, that's a big one. Um,
Hmm.
and trying to keep a sense of sort of compassionate equanimity towards everyone who I encounter. That's sometimes a challenge because we have a lot of preferences, don't we? Like there's
Yeah.
there's there's people who it's really easy to be nice with, and Yet sometimes, when people challenge you or yell at you, it becomes a lot more difficult
To
to
be
look at them with
compassionate.
compassion. Yeah, yeah. We sort of righteously feel a certain anger that we have a right to express, and
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not looking to repress what I feel, but when we can look at what we're feeling with a mindful awareness, a lot of times the potency, behind our anger or our frustration kind of dissolves all
Mm,
by
yeah,
itself.
yeah.
So that goes back to just maintaining a kind of awareness.
And so does that lead to less reaction? So when you're in that heated
Yeah,
thing and someone's giving you a hard time or yelling at you, you can feel it rise up in you, and then you can go, okay, well, I can find some compassion in there, and that may just dissolve some of that feeling of discomfort or annoyance with them, and then you're probably less inclined to throw up a zap signal or give them
yeah,
the
yeah.
finger.
No question about it. I mean, so there's a meditation practice that I didn't want to forget to mention actually
Mm,
today, which is called Tong Len. It means taking and sending, and so it's a really wonderful practice to do, whether you've got somebody yelling at you, or in a difficult situation, or when you're witnessing suffering, whether that be in another individual or suffering in nature, for example. Um, and there's plenty of suffering to go around, so there's a lot of opportunities to use this technique. But basically, the idea is, normally we have this tendency to want all the good things for ourselves and to avoid all of the things that are uncomfortable or that we don't want. And so in this Tonglen technique, we sort of try to do the opposite of that, which might be a bit of an insult to our ego. That's part of the idea. So if you've got somebody who's upset with you and maybe is yelling at you, the idea is to take in what they're expressing. So if they're expressing that emotion, you literally take it in. You take it into yourself. You can inhale it, and if you want to, you can add a visualization to this, as if you're inhaling the a sort of black sooty smoke coming from them. That anger element, and you take that in, um, and you can sort of convert that to its antidote for them, and honestly it's also for yourself, in a sense. So you're taking in that anger, and if the antidote is, for example, patience might be the antidote
mm.
to anger in general, or to that person's anger. You want to convert that black smoke into, let's say, a white light that would ride on your out breath, and you would uh, attach your patience to that and send it to them. And in the process of doing that, and in the face of that person's anger or frustration, you are creating within yourself more of exactly what the situation needs, which is the antidote, the patience
Mm.
that's required. So,
Wow.
um,
So it's alchemy. You transmuting
yeah,
one element into another. So you taking in their, let's call them negative states, and as the alchemist, you are then transmuting that and not only delivering that antidote to them, but in the process totally diffusing that toxin,
right.
as if you were sucking in the poison and then giving them vital essence back.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. It's an alchemy, and alchemy is really interesting to me. There's a lot of different types of alchemy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when I came to Portugal, I learned a little bit about royal alchemy. This um, art of transmuting elements into things that are more valuable, whether it's
Wow.
with plants or with minerals. Um, and that's very interesting. And Taoist alchemy and internal alchemy of working with the inner energies of the body is also very interesting. But this honestly attracts me more, because I think it's, if we want to be happy and if we want to live in a peaceful world, I think this is what we need more than anything, right? More than being able to turn lead into gold or levitate off of our meditation cushion. We need to not be, killing each other. So
Oh man, you're so on it, Max. Sometimes I have to wait till the end for the podcast for the real goal to come. But I think you're kind of right on it there, aren't you? And if I pronounce it correctly, is it Tonglen?
Tonglen, yeah.
Tonglen, and it just sounds so potent. I remember you doing this for us on Kyra Wild on our men's retreat, and we were doing an exercise for someone, and I remember it being pretty powerful then. But I'd only kind of saw it in that state of taking it in for their ailment and for that suffering for that person. But when you did it in that way, we were trying to help that person. Here you're saying here's someone who's antagonizing you or giving you a hard time or bringing in a negative energy, and you as the alchemist and seeing yourself in that role is so empowering and so healing for the person you giving to. I mean, because ultimately the antagonizer wants a response, and that's only going to fuel their same. They're going to get that same response, which is going to fuel their same patterns.
Yeah.
And so by not giving them that, when we don't give them that, that's going to diffuse that pattern or make them totally confused at the very least.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully it will help. It's unlikely to cause any more damage or escalate the situation. It's more likely to help de-escalate. Yeah. And so you can really use that technique in virtually any situation. And you don't even need to wait for a situation like that to occur. You can go to a comfortable area of your house and sit down, and you can use your imagination and do that.
So perhaps you might be able to rehearse that. I'm just thinking like, okay,
yes,
well,
yeah.
I was at work today and that person really triggered me. So let me just sit down, reimagine that. And now I'll say, okay, right. They were angry at me, or they were unhappy about something and was directed at me. And I'm able to take that in as that black smoke or whatever acrid substance it is, breathe that in, and then transmute it into the antidote, which might be patience or love or kindness, and then breathe that out as a white light or something that has that feeling for you, and send it out to them, and at the same time giving it to yourself.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what we should do. This is not so easy when you're in the heat of the moment. So it's really recommended. Yeah. It's always recommended to try it with simpler stuff, with kind of mild situations first, back at home in a safe space where maybe you're gonna still have a hard time with it, and you increase your skill level over time.
Yeah, so I'm sure sometimes you're sitting there and you go, actually, that person is a real so and so. Do they deserve that? And my anger is righteous, and so I'm going to hold on to that. But just like holding the hot coal, it's not hurting them, is it? It's hurting you.
No, that's exactly right. It's exactly right. It's poisonous for us, actually. And these kinds of emotions are looked that way in Buddhism, that they are really poisonous, and they lead to imbalances within us that ultimately cause sickness and disease. So I think we can look at it that way. I mean, I don't know. That's not necessarily a popular view of emotions in general. I think in popular culture we're sort of encouraged to feel everything and express everything, and but in Buddhism, it's emotions are not necessarily the problem. But it is that sort of sticky quality. It's the fact that we grab a hold of it.
If you could hang on to them and then just give them away straight away, it'd be fine. But we don't, like you say, it's sticky, and it's that habitual part. So so and so pissed me off 20 years ago and I still hate them for it. It's that resentment
Yeah.
that just hangs around, right? That event happened decades ago, and yet it still defines your opinion of them and your relationship to that person. And that's where I think that chronic undermining of yourself, and that's perhaps where the sickness and disease come in. I mean, you get angry at someone once, it's unlikely to make you ill, but if you hold on to that anger for a long time, it
Yeah.
probably will.
Yeah. Yeah, and as well, so I'm a student of Tibetan medicine, so a Rigpa, and in that system of traditional medicine, they view these various emotions as potentially imbalancing the elements that make up our constitution, and if they can do that, whether that's through their effect on the circulatory system or on the nervous system or individual organs. There are all these associations in that system. Then, yeah, we have to really think hard about what's going on in our minds because it's really important for not just for our behavior and what we do to the planet and to others, but it's gonna affect our health on subtle or on gross levels as well.
Wow. So you expand that just from interpersonal relationships into societal and cultural and
Well, yeah, because whatever's going on in our mind is, besides the effect it's going to have on us, it's our minds are determining all of our behavior, and then in particular, in my opinion, the problems that we see uh, within, for example, our humanity's relationship to nature. We've got a massive loss of forests worldwide. I mean, something like 97% of the planet is deforested.
yeah.
Oceans that are, to some degree toxifying or acidifying, and on and on and on. And that's got to do with our relationship to nature, but on another level, it's our relationship with our emotions and things like greed and desire and attachment ultimately. So if we have any hope of having more trees in the world
We need
and more
less
living
greed, desire,
forests,
and attachment.
well, we need to at least start looking at what's going on in our heads. Yeah, I think so.
So ultimately, the challenges that we're seeing in nature are down to our behaviors, which are driven by our emotions centered around greed and attachments to stuff.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, a lot of that is in Buddhist terms. There's another little list of stuff called the eight worldly dharmas or the eight worldly concerns, and so these are our preferences. Things like a preference for pleasure and an aversion to pain. I mean, obviously, um, the preference goes without saying, right? Or um, a preference for fame and an aversion to infamy or disrepute. Um, these kinds of preferences, on the one hand, they totally make sense in modern society, but when we are attached to things that we cannot truly ever hold on to, we're going to have a problem, right? I mean, I was thinking about this earlier today because I have a little bit of an addiction to raw cashews, and I yeah,
Cashew nuts.
to raw cashew nuts, right? So
Yeah.
so in this little addiction of mine, I have a problem, which is that they're not always the same. They're not always in these bags coming out the way that I like them. So I want them to be a certain level of chewy and a certain level of sort of nutty flavor, whatever. And sometimes it's perfect, they're so good. And other times, a total disappointment, too dry, really upsetting stuff. So, and this is again nature, right? Like Buddhism observes how things really are, which is everything, the cashew nut arises due to various causes and conditions. And if the year that that cashew nut grew, perhaps there was a small drought, ultimately, I wind up with displeasure related to my bag of cashews. So that's a sort of interconnectedness that's going on. And well, I don't know where I'm going with this. It's just that, we have a problem.
They have problems with our satisfaction and wanting things to be a certain way.
Right. And so ultimately this is quite objective, I think. Things don't work this way. The cashew nuts are not always going to be exactly the way that I want them to be. It can't happen that way because they arise based on various causes and conditions that are themselves dependent on a number of other causes and conditions. So if you really look at people or nature, everything's like this. And as a result, there's no stability. And by the same token, we will eventually, if we live long enough, we're likely to get sick. And it goes without saying that we will eventually die. And this is where, sometimes Buddhism is looked at as being a bit morbid because this is a very popular topic of discussion. It's our lack of immortality and eventual demise. I don't think it's morbid. It's part of nature. It's part of life. And in the story of Prince Siddhartha, who became the historical Buddha, well, he was a totally sheltered prince with a beautiful family living inside a palace, and I don't think he ever saw nature at all, almost at all, until according to the story, he was led out of the palace with a driver and got to take a little tour of the city around him, right? And that was when he first saw nature, when he first saw people aging, people getting sick, or people dying. And like in the story, he would see somebody who looked sick on the side of the road and ask the driver, "What is that? What's going on with that person?" And the driver would be like, "Well, what's your problem?" And that guy's sick. And I think he was thinking, well, is that going to happen to me? Could that happen to my family?
Yeah.
To which obviously, the driver's like, well, yeah, probably eventually. How do you not know that, right? And the same thing with people aging, seeing old people in the city, seeing corpses on the side of the road, and wondering, what is that? Is that going to happen to me too? And so that was kind of the inspiration. I think this is an inspiration for his personal quest to understand what this is, this situation that we're all in, like what's going on here. That's why he left that palace and left his family there and went to learn from whoever he could and to meditate for years and years and try to figure this out. So it came about, I think, as a result of observing just the way things are. That was the inspiration.
And the one R is that we're going to die.
Yeah, that ultimately, like everything else that arises due to a combination of various causes and conditions, we all are built up of many, many ingredients and moving parts. None of those things will last forever. And we can just, think about everything in our lives. Everything's like that, including our favorite TV shows. I mean, eventually The Mandalorian will not be made anymore, and I will suffer, Tim. I will suffer.
And it's that, so acknowledging, so is it right? So is there sort of, that is acknowledging that it's not going to be the way you always want. So that's kind of step one. It's like just kind of going, okay, the bag of cashews isn't always going to be the way you want it. Things aren't going to show up in the way that you always expect and want or can predict. And so in that way, even though we tend to have some predictability in our lives, it's not all predictable, and variation is inevitable.
That's right.
And then, and part of that, but the only inevitable thing is that our physical bodies will die. And I think I remember feeling that way during COVID, and everyone was terrified that people were going to die. And I was kind of like, well, like that's a reality every day for most people.
Yeah, yeah.
You might just not wake up, or the roof might cave in on you, or there's this impending thing. And it was just like, oh, we could die. And I watched some of my friends, particularly some of my older friends, and they were terrified.
Mm.
And it's almost like they'd never got to the point of like, yeah, I'm going to die. And what that meant to them particularly, maybe their loved ones, or
Sure.
but there's that.
Well, it's very understandable.
It sounds
isn't
like
it?
you said there's a that Buddhism really kind of delves into that. Is that true?
Yeah, very,
into
very
death and what
much.
it might mean.
Yeah, I don't know any other tradition that delves so deeply into this topic. But people's anxiety, I mean, it's very easy, I think, to relate to and to understand. I mean, the complete cessation and destruction of everything that you know and have built your life around, including yourself that you are so attached to. You know, we have this body and this identity and this reputation sometimes, and we want to kind of guard and protect that all the time. You know, we only want to put organic food in our body. We're constantly fostering and protecting these various things in our life. And so the idea that ultimately something is going to come over and just sweep it all away like it was nothing, that might be a little bit uncomfortable. That's understandable.
So does like other traditions hold to a life after death, after physical death, and let's call it spirit or soul or whatever your tradition is, around what might happen to you, the essential you, after physical death. Is there a sustained line in Buddhism around what happens with that?
Well, yeah. So there is a notion of sort of a reincarnation that's somehow occurs, and yeah, this is described actually in quite a lot of detail in the various lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, and also in Tibetan medicine. And so Rigpa, it's explained quite clearly. First, the death process and the dissolution of the various elements that make up our body and that also make up all of nature, how those break down, and in a particular kind of logical order from the more gross elements to the more subtle. And then what happens to our mind and the various stages that it goes through in the death process. All of this is very clearly described. And then the what happens to our consciousness, and ultimately its journey to to potentially go into the next lifetime. I mean, some of this is a bit difficult to wrap one's head around right now. Maybe that's because we're still alive. But for me personally, I don't get too hung up about it. I think just within this lifetime, I feel like I've had many lifetimes, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of them feel
adding a few more is a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it might be, and so I'm comfortable with the idea of reincarnation. That's always made sense to me since a very young age, really. And I'm comfortable with the idea of sort of working on my mind now with the hope that might actually be of benefit when I die. That makes a great deal of sense to me. I mean, I've unfortunately I've seen people die. I had this with both my parents, where I was there when they were sick, and I was there, with them in the room when they died, and you see how people handle it. And one of the things I saw with that is, I don't want to, die in a hospital, and I want to work on my mind now so that when that time comes, I can enjoy it. Actually,
Have a good death.
I don't want to be full. Yeah, I want to have a good death. Yeah, I don't want to be full of fear and attachment if I can help it. I want to be clear and enjoy the ride and, no worries and, go for it. Absolutely. And that's going to take some work. And I mean, that's why I'm an aspiring Buddhist.
That's why you're still working on
I've got
it.
a long way to go, I'm afraid. Yeah, I'm going to need to live a little bit longer.
Oh, I'm loving these insights, and a lot of them echo some of my thoughts around that, and wanting to have that, and not fearing that, and not being attached to that. And I guess that's a life's work in itself. We're kind of moving towards the end of our chat, which is always goes too quickly. Is there kind of some advice or a tip or a little hack or something you can share with the listeners on how we can deepen our practice on some of these topics that you've mentioned? Something just really tangible and easy for us to do, and that we don't have to carve out a whole chunk of our day to sit and meditate, or some kind of concept or thing that we can attach to or can work on quite easily.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's wonderful if you can have a daily meditation practice, but that doesn't need to be a big chunk of your day. I would suggest, and this is what I try to do, basically as soon as I wake up in the morning and even before getting out of bed, is to have a moment in the morning where you can, take 2 minutes before you get out of bed to check where your mind is and perform some sort of meditation. And same thing at night, basically framing your day in the beginning and at the end with a little time for reflection and awareness. And then if you want to extend that into your day, there's a lot of ways to do that. Personally, I really love the practice of counting mantras. If there's one that you feel an affinity towards, then that's a great thing to do during the day to bring your head back to where you want it to be. Mantra as a word means to protect one's mind from its own negativity.
Oh, wow.
So,
wow, that's great.
So when you're reciting a mantra, you can do that with or without a visualization, and it's a form of meditation. And I think that it feels very healthy and centering and balancing.
So what might that sound like?
Well, one of the most classic ones, at least like in the Tibetan tradition, the most famous mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, is the mantra of compassion, the mantra of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion.
So what are those in English? What are the phrases?
Oh, translating it into English, I'm not sure about that.
So I guess it's got to have some. For me, it's got to have some kind of meaning. I can say like a Sanskrit word or something, but unless I know what the words mean, I don't feel like.
So the thing is, I think a mantra. I think mantras can be anything. I mean, if you want to, you could make your own.
Yeah.
But when you use one like that one or another from one of these old lineages, there's this idea that it carries with it. Certainly, there's a lot of meaning, a lot of deep meaning, and you can read about all of these and see which one you feel connected to. You can get teachings from a teacher, from a lama, where they help you with it and kind of empower you to use the mantra. But typically, these ones anyhow are recited either in Tibetan or in their original Sanskrit.
But you have an idea of what they mean, right? You're not just
you have a general. I mean, honestly, whatever the mantra is, I mean, when I'm reciting one, I'm not thinking about the meaning really.
Okay.
It's more of a general understanding of it and the feeling.
Okay.
And because you want it to be, I think you want it to be kind of an embodied practice. You want to feel it you want to have some emotion behind it. Yeah,
So you want to feel the mantra. So it's not just the words; it's the feeling with
you want to
those.
feel it. Yeah, you want to taste it. You want to smell it. It needs to become
And so
a
that,
real
and for
thing.
you, is that like a sense of centeredness or calmness, or how does that feel for you in your body?
Yeah, I think there's usually at the very least there's a real feeling of going inward
Okay,
and
that helps me to
yeah,
find
a
that
deep
place of centered
centeredness.
self, and if you can conjure that, and then the words can help you connect to that. I can sense how that might feel. Brilliant. So before uh, on waking, just see where your mind's at, check in with that, um, and maybe reframe with that. Maybe a tip or
Right. I mean, it might just be a few breaths
mhm,
that you take in the morning. It's a nice practice, I think, to expel the stale air out of the lungs.
mhm.
So you can sit up and just focus on your breathing and do that for a little while, and then again at the end of the day. I mean, this is super simple, but it's quite powerful too.
Brilliant, Max. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and touching on some really important things that we all go through, and how some of the ideas in Buddhism and your experience translate into our lives, and how that can help us. So I'm really grateful for you taking the time out and sharing that with us. I'm going to share your details in the show note caption. So if people have any particular questions on where they might access some books or reading material, I know you've got lots of those to share. Um, he's always sending me things to read, which I usually don't, but they're in my library. So I know he has resources to share
Very good.
and a lot of wisdom to impart. So I know he's going to be available to you. We'll share his details in the show note caption. So Maxi, be prepared for a flood of information and requests coming your way.
Absolutely. Well, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Cool, man. Much love, pal.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for listening. We've just passed a major milestone with 1,000 downloads, something I'm really happy about. Thanks for listening, and especially a big thank you to our amazing guests over the last few weeks. If you haven't caught all of them, why not go back and pick out the ones you've missed? Next week, we've got the amazing Don Clum coming in, Dr. Don Clum, and he's going to be talking to us about fasting. So look forward to that.